Thank you for tuning in. This is the Rice Crypto Show, and I'm your host, Rice. And on today's episode, my very special guest is somebody who I've been trying to get on the show for quite some time, Andreas Antonopoulos. Now, if you're unfamiliar with who Andreas is, I definitely encourage you to do some research and educate yourself about this guy. He is a Bitcoin advocate. He is a teacher. He is an author, and he's also the host of a podcast called Let's Talk Bitcoin. Now, before we get into today's video, I do want to encourage everybody to stay as safe and as healthy as possible. Continue to do the social distancing and self-quarantine thing, because that is the most important thing that we can do right now with everything that's going on considering this virus. Now, this is your first time ever watching any of my content. I do encourage you to explore my channel. Make sure you're subscribed. Hit that like button, hit the notification bell so you can stay up to date with my videos as they come out. And make sure you're following me on my backup channel on LBRY, where I post exclusive content to encourage people to check out these decentralized social media platforms. So we're just going to go ahead and get right into today's interview. All right, ladies and gentlemen, like I said, today's very special guest on the Rice Crypto Show is Andreas Antonopoulos. Andreas, thank you so much for coming on the show today. How are you doing?
Oh, it's a pleasure, Rice. Thank you for having me on the show, and very happy to be here. Doing well.
Thank you. Yeah, considering everything that's going on around the world, I mean, this is definitely a really interesting time to interview you. I know that you've done a lot of studying of economics and our financial system, and we're at a really crazy point in history, kind of no man's land. And we just seen today, I guess the Federal Reserve is basically saying we've got quantitative easing infinity, and we're just basically going to buy up everything that we possibly can to try to salvage the situation. So what are your thoughts about what's going on right now as far as our global financial system and a crash and this meltdown that we're seeing?
Well, I think the first conclusion to draw from this is that what's going to be blamed for this recession is coronavirus, which I think is it's certainly the thing that pushed the economy over the edge. But you know, for the past 10 years, we've watched an increasingly hollowed out, fragile economy being built on the financialization of everything with massive leverage, stock prices being propped up with buybacks, and near zero interest rates worldwide, and continuous stimulus and quantitative easing, which never really stopped. And none of the structural issues in the economy fixed. So this was a profoundly sick economy, well overdue for a massive recession. And of course, it's been pushed over the edge by coronavirus, and certainly the measures of isolation that we need to take are going to make this one of the sharpest and most severe recessions. But the cure is exactly the same as always. It's basically bailouts for failing companies. It's shielding very large corporations from the impact of competition and risk. Companies like Boeing, who can no longer make planes that fly and deserve to be taken apart in bankruptcy and have the actual productive equipment and staff and personnel and employees get bought by other companies and hired by other companies that are better at doing this. Instead, these sick companies get bailed out. Airlines that have been squeezing their passengers for the past decade and kind of nickel and diming every pretzel, every little bag of fake pretzels on every flight, and treating their own customers like garbage, are now getting bailouts. Basically, the cure to too much debt, too much financialization, too much fake money, too much malinvestment, too much plutocracy and corruption and bailouts is more plutocracy, corruption, bailouts, and fake money. And this is obviously not going to work. So yes, this is a really, really challenging time. And it's going to be politically challenging as well, because a lot of people are waking up to the fact that once again, they're getting sold out. While the richest and the largest corporations are getting bailed out with unlimited money, and the dying middle class and lower classes, economic classes in the United States are getting told that they should have planned their emergency funds better.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely insane when you think about it. And when you mentioned some of the industries that you talked about, this morning I was watching something and somebody was pointing out how much these companies like Boeing and the various airline industry companies, how much they paid in fines to the United States government for not doing things the way that they're supposed to do. And we're still bailing them out. So I'm hoping that people are really going to wake up and see that, what's actually happening, and start to lose faith in our fiat money system, start to realize the truth behind what the Federal Reserve is and how corrupt it is and how much it's hurting our society. And maybe people will actually start to care and do something about that. And the cool thing
I'm not that hopeful. I'm really not that hopeful.
I'm trying to be.
Because instead of waking up and looking very critically at the kind of corruption that exists, especially in the United States. But, these are global problems of political dysfunction and corruption. Instead of looking at that, instead of looking at the authoritarian tendencies of these so-called democracies, instead of looking at these emergency measures that will become permanent, it's so much easier and more satisfying to just blame some foreigner, just like after 9/11, right?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what's happening. A lot of people are quite happy to chalk this up to blaming China.
I'm seeing a lot of that.
The playbook is always the same. Bit more racism, bit more xenophobia, bit more border controls and authoritarian measures, as if this isn't a virus that affects everybody equally and that is not stopped by borders in an interconnected world. So I think that we're going to see those kinds of reactions. Of course, I'm speaking from the perspective of the U.S. because this is the country I live in, and I care about how the politics plays out here. But it's exactly the same kind of problems and worse are happening in authoritarian China, where they're trying to now blame America for the virus. I think that's a very dangerous reaction, but I think a lot of people are going to fall for it. So I'm not that optimistic that people will wake up and notice that their government is basically pickpocketing them and using this crisis as a tremendous opportunity to lavish even more money on the most powerful and rich people. And this is happening in every country in the world. While they're being pickpocketed by their government, they're being very effectively distracted to blame some poor foreigner, immigrant, refugee, homeless person, etc., for not trying hard enough to remain virus-free.
Well, do you think that with all the inflation and money that they're going to be pumping into the system, and do you think we'll hit a point of hyperinflation?
I don't know. I mean, the thing is, hyperinflation often occurs as a result of these kinds of things. But I don't know that we will necessarily see hyperinflation. What's happened in the US over the past decade is that most of the inflation has expressed itself in these massive asset bubbles and in inflation in some fundamental aspects of living, such as rent and healthcare. So a lot of people have experienced that inflation in their ability to afford healthcare, their ability to afford rent or buy a home, right, which has become impossible for an entire generation of people. So inflation doesn't always translate into the consumer product index and basic staples like food. Until now, it hasn't. Until now, what it's done is it's increased in places where people have a lot less pricing option, and where markets are already dysfunctional. And in that case, the inflation has been rampant in these asset bubbles. I don't know if we're going to get monetary hyperinflation in the United States or not.
What about the rest of the world? I mean, like, I see with the dollar bill kind of going up in value or purchasing power right now. I see like the Australian dollar going down and other currencies, and I kind of feel like that's going to become kind of a norm. Do you think other countries will experience hyperinflation, like Venezuela or Greece Zimbabwe?
What we're seeing right now worldwide is more, in developing nations at least, is more deflationary effects. Okay. So basically, zero to negative interest rates and zero growth or negative growth at the same time. These kinds of deflationary effects that we saw in Japan over their so-called lost decades, which have an enormous negative impact on the next generation. But what we're really seeing right now is a massive wealth transfer. Now, whether that wealth transfer turns into junk money, that remains to be seen. And I'm not a monetary economist. I think it's ironic that at the same time that people are hoarding toilet paper, driving the cost of toilet paper up, the federal government is driving the value of the Federal Reserve notes dollar down, so that in the near future, perhaps these two commodities switch places. All of this toilet paper we're hoarding could be turned into very effective monetary base. If one sheet of toilet paper is worth $1, and then vice versa, all of the dollars will become toilet paper. So it's an interesting juxtaposition.
That is a really interesting way of putting it, man. And I appreciate you saying it like that, because it actually kind of puts everything in perspective. Well, okay, so you're a Bitcoin advocate, and in 2008, Halloween of 2008, Satoshi Nakamoto released the Bitcoin white paper, and I feel like it was put out because of what was happening in our financial system, especially what happened in 2008, which basically, like you said, our system has been sick. A lot of people say it's been on life support, zombie banks. So now Bitcoin, for the first time, is being tested for what it was created for, in my opinion. And so how do you think that's going to play into all this? And then after we're done talking about that, I'd like to talk about the halvening, which is coming up in about 50 days. But I'd really like to get your feelings about how you think that Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies will be embraced in this time period, and how Bitcoin will, if it will get tested the way it's supposed to, and what your thoughts are on that.
Well, there's really two very broadly different perspectives about Bitcoin. And I think especially in the last couple of years, the emphasis has been on the monetary qualities of Bitcoin, with various models that have been promoted by people who have an Austrian economics perspective, including the kind of stock versus flow model of sound money, based on Austrian principles, and that comparison to gold 2.0, the store value theory of Bitcoin, together with some slightly more outlandish perspectives around hyper-Bitcoinization, and the idea that eventually you end up with only one form of sound money surviving. I don't really subscribe to that philosophy around Bitcoin. For me, Bitcoin has always been about creating an open system that gives people choice, and creating an open and decentralized environment where access to economic systems, to financial systems, to money itself, for those who are unbanked and underbanked, or are becoming unbanked or debanked. My idea has been that's what this is about. It's about people having choice. So having many more choices available that both explore different aspects of monetary policy, but also different application capabilities with decentralized systems like blockchains. And sound money is one small aspect of that. For me, it's never been the central principle of this experiment. And I think this technology has a lot more to offer than simply a monetary policy. Now, that doesn't mean the monetary policy is incorrect or that the monetary policy itself isn't, an astonishingly strong principle, and it highlights that aspect of decentralization where no one can change that monetary policy because of the decentralized nature. So it would be impossible without an open decentralized system where no one has the power to change the sound money principle, because if they did, they'd immediately change it, right?
They would.
So basically, that certainly demonstrates one of the key powers of this system of rules without rulers, of deterministic consensus rules that everybody subscribes to and all of that. I think that's really important. But to me, what's more important than that is the free market for currencies, is an open, free space for competition between currencies, competition between financial systems, competition between applications that can be built on the principles of trustless, decentralized operation in completely open and borderless networks, the principles of being resistant to censorship and giving access to everyone. Those principles are very important to me. More so than the monetary experiments. The monetary experiments, we can argue all day, and I'm not an economist, and I'm not going to even try to argue that for or against. If the people who believe in hyper Bitcoinization, stock to flow models to the moon, etc., are correct, they're correct, and history will play that out.
Right.
But it's no skin off my. I mean, I would benefit tremendously if that's correct. But to me, this technology stands even without that, meaning that the ability to have a free and open market and competition between currencies, and to allow anyone to participate anywhere around the world without authorization from their government, and even in some cases bypassing currency controls and banking access controls imposed by authoritarian governments, which are a majority of the governments in the world. That is a revolutionary and very important transition of humanity to an open economic system. And that matters more than whether one monetary policy can rule all the others. And, we can also try that experiment too.
Love it, dude. I love it. And you got to stay open-minded to things and not, I don't like the maximalist point of view. I like people who try to grow and change with technology and times, because I think that's very important. I mean, this is a very new technology, and I think that we have a long way to go for advancements. But with that being said, we've got right now a really huge event taking place with Bitcoin. I think we're 50 days away. If the date's correct, Wednesday, May 13th is where we're thinking that the halvening is going to take place.
Right.
For people who are unfamiliar with who are kind of new to crypto and stuff, I mean, I'm familiar, but since you're an educator, would you mind explaining what the halvening is?
Yes, absolutely. So Bitcoin operates by a number of algorithms or recipes, if you like, that control its future evolution that was set in stone when Bitcoin was launched. One of those algorithms is based on the heartbeat of Bitcoin, which is the issuance of a new block every 10 minutes. And within that new block, as a reward for securing the network, miners receive a reward, and that reward is partly in the form of transaction fees and partly in the form of a block subsidy, as it's called, where new Bitcoin are issued. And these new Bitcoin are basically created from nothing. But in order to earn them, you have to expend energy and provide security to the network. So they're not given for nothing. In fact, they're given for proof of work, which is the security mechanism in Bitcoin. So miners collect these rewards. Every 10 minutes, there's a block. And these rewards are designed to diminish every 210,000 blocks. So after the first 210,000 blocks in 2012, about 4 years into Bitcoin's life, and if you do the math, block on average every 10 minutes, 210,000 blocks is 4 years. Right. But not exactly 4 years, because blocks are not exactly every 10 minutes. They're on average 10 minutes. Sometimes they're faster, sometimes they're slower. That dynamically adjusts to keep that heartbeat on an average of 10 minutes on the long term. So approximately every 4 years. So in 2012, the reward went from 50 new Bitcoin per block to 25 new Bitcoin per block. In 2016, it went from 25 to 12.5 Bitcoin per block. And in May, at some point in May, at block, so the time we're not entirely sure about, because that changes as per block, but we are very sure about the block number.
Right.
Block 660,001 will have 6.25 Bitcoin block subsidy in it. That's baked into the rules. As the block, that new block is issued, everybody calculates the same equation, and that equation is divide the total number of blocks that have been issued so far by 210,000, and then take that and divide the reward in half that many times, and you arrive at an answer, and that answer is 6.25 Bitcoin. Everybody makes the same calculation every block and decides what the subsidy for the next block should be. So at the same time, when block 660,001 comes out, everybody will have made that calculation, and they will reject a block that has more than 6.25 Bitcoin in its block subsidy. That mechanism of only accepting a block that has the correct subsidy and rejecting a block that doesn't is what forces miners to issue the block with the correct amount. Otherwise, they waste the energy by producing an invalid block. And that ensures that the issuance of Bitcoin is cut in half, hence the word halvening. If you follow that mathematical progression, 6.25 now in 2020, 3 1/8 in 2024, 1.7 something in 2028, and so on and so forth. It keeps diminishing in this geometric fashion until eventually, by the year 2140, or actually the year 2136, it goes down to 1 Satoshi, and then in 2141 or whatever, it goes down to 0. So that is what keeps the total issuance at less than 21 million Bitcoin. When people say there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin, actually it's going to be 20,999,999 Bitcoin, 997 and some change. And so it never reaches 21 million. It's just short of that when you add up all of these little blocks.
I did not know that, man. I learned something new, and I really appreciate how you explained that. I mean, since you are an educator, I thought it made sense. And, because some people, they're really confused by it, and that's why I wanted to ask you if you could explain it. Now, do you mind sharing your thoughts about what's going on with the upcoming halvening, and how do you think that, because I think that what's happening in the previous two halvenings, we can't really take in consideration this time around, considering our economic climate. So, yeah, how do you think all this is going to affect the halvening?
So the important thing to realize is that what this does is it changes one of the important factors that miners and others consider in terms of their profitability and break-even point. So I mentioned that Bitcoin has a couple of very important dynamic algorithms. One is the issuance schedule, which we just discussed. The other one, which is really interesting, is what's called the difficulty adjustment or retargeting. So when miners are mining, they face a certain amount of difficulty in finding a solution, and that difficulty is calibrated so that a block is found on average every 10 minutes. But in order to keep that calibrated to 10 minutes, the algorithm has to dynamically adjust up and down depending on how many people are trying to mine. Think about it in terms of miners throwing dice. It's not an exact analogy, but it's close enough. Think of it as miners throwing dice and looking for a specific combination, right? Only they're throwing a lot of dice, a bucket of dice, and they have to get all sixes in a bucket of dice. And so depending on how many miners are trying to do this, it gets easier or harder, and the algorithm dynamically adjusts what the target score of the dice has to be to make it easier or harder to find an answer. So for example, let's say you win by throwing anything over a certain number, and a lot of different combination of dice throws can be above that number. And the higher you set that number, the harder it is, because fewer and fewer combinations are actually winning combinations. So this retargeting algorithm operates in the background, and it recalibrates the 10 minutes. And this happens every 2 weeks. So every 2016 blocks, which is approximately 2 weeks, everyone in the Bitcoin system does a recalculation of how difficult it should be to find a block based on how many people are trying, based on how long it took to find blocks over the past 2 weeks. And then in a proportionate way, adjust the difficulty. Everybody puts the same numbers into the same equation, and therefore gets the same answer, which they then apply as the difficulty target to the subsequent block after that calculation. So this is a very interesting mechanism that executes inside Bitcoin. What it does is it keeps the heartbeat steady at 10 minutes, but it also means that at any moment in time, if you think about the thousands of miners that are operating out there, and they have hundreds of thousands of these mining machines, and these mining machines come from various generations of hardware. Mm-hmm. Some are more efficient than others. And these miners then have various prices of electricity and various contracts they've signed up for, sometimes 6 months to a year of electricity bought in advance at a specific rate. They have different operating expenses. They have different costs for labor. They have different costs for the facilities that they're renting. They have all of these different costs, which means that for a given price of Bitcoin and a given ability and difficulty to find Bitcoin with mining, they have a price point at which they're profitable for the majority of their machines. If they go below that price point and they're no longer profitable, what they'll do is they'll turn off the machines. But not everyone is running at the same level of efficiency. You have to think of this as a range. So some miners are way more efficient, some miners are way less efficient. They have more expensive electricity, more expensive labor costs, older equipment, or some combination of these factors, whereas other miners have cheaper electricity, longer term contracts, better labor costs, and more efficient equipment. That means that at any moment in time, some miners in the lower profitability levels will be unprofitable, and some miners in the higher profitability levels will be highly profitable. When the miners who are less profitable turn off their machines, what that does is it reduces the time, it reduces the amount of hash rate available to the network, which means the blocks are found slightly less often. Let's say not 10 minutes, but 11 minutes on average. After 2 weeks of that happening on average, then the network will adjust and say, we don't have enough people mining, blocks are too slow, so the difficulty is going to get easier, and that's going to get us back to 10-minute blocks. Now think about the miners who were more profitable and stayed with their machines on after the miners turned their machines off now become even more profitable because the difficulty went down, because they're now a bigger percentage of the network hash rate. So this dynamic adjustment happens, which means when you read articles that say that it is not profitable to mine Bitcoin below a certain price, that's not actually true, because the break-even price depends on the difficulty, and the difficulty dynamically adjusts to represent the market. Miners knowing that this will happen in terms of halving will happen 4 years in advance means they can predict right now exactly how profitable they're going to be after that halving versus how profitable they are now if they're generating half as many Bitcoin. And some of them will decide they're not going to be profitable and they're going to turn off their machines. Depending on how long they have electricity contracts. And that may cause the hash rate to drop. And if it drops, think about it in this way. The worst case scenario is that it drops 50% because half the miners become unprofitable and turn off their machines. And then the other half of the miners who remain become twice as profitable because now they have double the market share. And since there's half as much money, but they're twice as profitable, they get back to where they were before. So that's the worst case scenario. It's actually not going to get that bad, in my opinion. And the reason it's not going to get that bad is simply because miners have seen this for a long time. It's unlikely they're going to suddenly discover that half of them are unprofitable. Even if it did, however, think about it this way. 50% of today's hash rate is the same as the hash rate we had at the beginning of 2018, a time when the network was very, very, very secure and was millions of times more secure than it was, 5-6 years earlier. So the hash rate has been expanding so much that even if it's cut by half, the network continues to operate as if nothing happens. So that's the technical aspect. The technical aspect is really simple. Not much is going to happen because while it happens on a specific block, everybody knows and has known for years. So the time to take action and price this in and anticipate and prepare for it and adjust your business plan for miners has been the last 4 years, not the day before.
Right.
I think we might see a drop in hash rate temporarily. The network is then going to continue. Difficulty is going to adjust and we move forward. One thing to remember is that if nothing happens, then something very important happened. If nothing happens, then Bitcoin survived another halving. If nothing happens, then Bitcoin survived the halving in the middle of a massive recession. If nothing happens, then Bitcoin survived the halving when other financial systems needed a bailout. If nothing happens, then Bitcoin survived when other financial systems had to have stop-loss circuit breakers go off. And Bitcoin didn't. That is a success. So for Bitcoin, the ultimate success is simply surviving. It's simply surviving without intervention, without a shutdown of the market, without the need for stimulus, without the need for a bailout, without any of that, in a completely open free market where it's traded 24 hours a day with no limits, no circuit breakers, no ability to inject stimulus, no ability to print more of it. And if it survives under those circumstances, that is an enormous success. So if nothing happens, then something tremendous happens. And that is, once more, Bitcoin is not dead. That is the ultimate survival story.
That was so well said, man. I'm so glad I got to talk to you today because it's such a crazy time period, like I was saying. And so I know I don't have a whole lot more time with you, so I want to go ahead and ask you the next question, which is we've finally got some Bitcoin improvement protocols in place. I'd like to get a better understanding about Schnorr signatures and how it's beneficial, and the same thing about Taproot.
Yes. So 3 new proposals have come out, and they're related to each other: Schnorr, Taproot, and TapScript.
TapScript. Okay, I wasn't familiar with that.
Yeah, and the 3 work together because they're a bundle of features that create a lot of good. I hate to use the buzzword synergy, but they work together in order to increase privacy in such a way that implementing just one of them wouldn't give us the full capability and would actually expose us some privacy problems. So that's why they've been bundled together, and they're likely to be activated as a single soft fork upgrade that activates all 3 capabilities simultaneously. I don't remember the specific BIP numbers. I think they're 340, 41, 42, maybe something like that. Bitcoin improvement proposals are basically documents that you can read that specify how this is going to work, together with some sample code and tests. Now, first, let's start with Schnorr signatures. Schnorr signatures are a type of signature that pre-existed elliptic curve digital signature algorithm. and were in patent protection when Satoshi built the first version of Bitcoin. And as a result, even though they were better than the elliptic curve digital signature algorithm and elliptic curve cryptography system, were not in wide use because they were protected by patents and they were expensive and proprietary. In fact, if you think about it, elliptic curve was really created, the ECDSA algorithm was really created because Schnorr signatures were in patent as the open alternative. So in any case, they went out of patent and they're now available for everybody to build implementations. And over the past 3 or 4 years, there's a number of people in the Bitcoin space and other spaces who have been doing extensive research and pushing forward the state of the art in Schnorr signatures. Schnorr signatures have a couple of very interesting advantages. First of all, they're slightly more compact than elliptic curve digital signatures. But the most interesting thing is the ability to do adapter signatures. And adapter signatures are where if you want to, how do I put this? Okay, let me use a simple example from basic arithmetic, right?
Okay.
So if you have a set of numbers and you add up one set of numbers and add up another set of numbers, the sum of the two is the same as the original sum, right? So you have these properties where the sum on one side of the equal sign is equal to the sum on the other side of the equal sign, and you can do various transitive properties there. So with Schnorr signatures, one of the interesting things that happens is if you have a series of private keys, a series of public keys, and a series of signatures, the sum of the signatures is the same as the signature that's applied with the sum of the private keys. And the sum of the public keys is the same as the public key of the sum of the private keys. What that means is that you could say, take a multisig, right, where we have 3 public keys, 3 private keys. One way to do that multisig is to produce 3 signatures, and everybody can check the 3 signatures and see that they correspond to the 3 public keys, and you've got a multisig. With Schnorr signatures, one of the things you can do is we can get onto a separate network and coordinate and produce a sum of signatures, a signature that is the sum of the signatures, that can be validated by a single public key, which actually is the sum of the public keys. And if you present that signature and that public key, to everyone else, it looks like a single payment or a single signature. You can't tell that 3 people came together to do that. So one of the things you can do with that is you can do signature aggregation, where if you want to verify a signature, instead of verifying all of the signatures against all of the public keys, you just add up all of the signatures, add up all of the public keys, and verify the sum of the signatures to the summed public key, and you're done. So one cryptographic operation on top of several arithmetic operations, which are a lot cheaper to do. That's called signature aggregation. But the other thing you can do is you can make certain types of group signatures where lots of people are signing, such as multisig or lightning channels or things like that, appear like a single signature on a single spend from a single public key, which looks like me paying you. Right? So if me paying you can look the same as me closing a lightning channel collaboratively with someone else, which is a 2 of 2 multisig, or me paying from a 3 of 5 multisig or 5 of 5 multisig, and we can make that look the same as a single signature, single public key, one of the interesting things that happens is it gives us the ability to increase the privacy of the system. If everything looks like a single payment, you can't tell the difference between a single payment, a multi-sig, a lightning channel. It all looks the same on the blockchain when recorded. That's a huge privacy improvement.
Yes.
So that feature is taken advantage of with Taproot. What Taproot is it's the ability to have a specific clause of the script that accounts for the everybody signed together with a single signature case. Everybody agreed. which you can apply to any smart contract that has complex clauses. Almost always there is one clause in that complex set which involves everybody agreeing. Let's say you have a corporate environment and you say, well, it should be so that 3 members of the board of directors can sign, or the CFO plus the attorney, or the CEO plus 2 of the backup keys, or if 90 days have elapsed, then the CFO plus the attorney plus 1 of the backup keys. You can create scripts like that, right?
Okay.
But if you think about all of these complex scripts, there's almost always the case where you say, well, if everybody agrees and everybody signs, that's a valid solution, right? And if you can convert that everybody agrees and everybody signs to everybody constructs a single signature and a single public key that is the sum of their public keys and presents that to the network, then on the network it looks like one signature applied on one coin, done. And you can't tell that there's a whole structure of signatures behind it. So that hides special cases, smart contracts, and makes them all look like single payments. The other aspect of this is TapScript, and among other things, what TapScript introduces is some changes to how the scripting works, but also the concept of Merkleized abstract syntax trees. And what that is basically taking Bitcoin script language and turning it into a tree, like the Merkle tree of transactions, where each leaf in the tree is a condition for spending. And you can specify which condition you're going to use by showing a path through the Merkle tree. So for example, let's go back to the corporate example we had before. You could say, okay, one leaf of the tree is the CEO plus the CFO signs. The other leaf is 4 out of the 5 directors sign. The other leaf is the CFO plus the attorney sign after a specific date. And then you summarize that as a tree. And when you spend from that tree, you only show the one clause that you're executing. For example, you say, okay, we're going to spend it using the CEO and CFO clause, which is down here, but nobody knows what other clauses exist in the tree because you don't reveal them if you're not using them. There could be thousands of other ways to spend that UTXO that are invisible. Taproot takes the tree and adds one leaf that is the everybody signs, and it looks like a single signature. And that way, as long as you can execute that, you can make the entire tree disappear, and it appears as if it's just a single payment. So that's the 3 proposals. Very exciting. Lots of possibilities for the future enhancements after that. And one of the reasons we can do this with a soft fork is because SegWit introduced the ability to have version numbers on scripts, which allows to upgrade the scripting language with a soft fork. So that opened the door for this. And it's a really, really great enhancement for privacy. It's a really great enhancement for efficiency of signature verification. And it creates a lot of opportunities for other enhancements in the future, which can further extend that model.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for explaining that. Again, I mean, I'm learning so much in this interview, and I appreciate it. I'm sure, and I'm hoping everybody else does. Now,
yeah, sorry for the long answer, but it is such a complex topic, and it's got so many little nuanced pieces. There's a lot of complexity under the covers, but you know, the good news is that a lot of that disappears from the perspective of the average user. All you're going to see is a SegWit address, which is going to start with BC1P. That's it.
Okay, cool. Well, I know my time is definitely running out. One last question, and this is all about what you're working on now. I mean, if people aren't familiar, you're an author, and you've written several books, and the one you're working on now is Mastering Lightning. Do you want to talk about that and give any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
Sure. Currently working on Mastering the Lightning Network. That is my 3rd technical book, Mastering Bitcoin and Mastering Ethereum, with the 1st and 2nd. And I've also completed 3 volumes of the Internet of Money series, Internet of Money Volume 1, 2, and 3, which also exist in a number of other languages. So working on a couple of projects right now, but one of them is writing Mastering the Lightning Network, which I'm doing with co-authors Renee Picard and Olaolo Stockton. And this is a live project on GitHub. It's open source. You can share and read for free. You can also see the book being written in real time. Now, I'll be honest with you, we're taking a two-week hiatus right now because of all of the disruption caused by coronavirus. But we're going to get back to it. We may be a bit delayed in our final publication of the book. I'm hoping we won't, but unexpected circumstances is certainly the theme of this here.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's a book about the Lightning Network. It's a book primarily for technical people. First couple of chapters, which have already been drafted and you can read, are accessible to anyone who has a basic understanding of this technology and are easy to read. And then as the chapters progress, it's going to get more and more and more technical, obviously. The end result is a college-level textbook that is primarily intended for software developers building applications on top of Lightning. People who want to understand how it works, people with Bitcoin technical expertise want to understand layer 2 networks, and for computer science and graduate programs in computer science who want to teach this at a university level.
Awesome. Well, Andreas, man, I really honestly appreciate you taking the time to come on the show. Thank you for explaining everything. Hopefully we can do this again in the future, because I have so many questions, but I'm just limited to time, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But man,
well, thank you so much for your time. I would love to do this again, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to discuss these topics and explain some of these technical topics for your audience. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, man. And the last thing I want to say is please stay safe. Stay healthy, keep your immune system strong, and because we need people like you in this world. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm trying my best. Yeah, thank you.
Much love, Andreas.
Stay safe. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Well, that was a very informative interview. I definitely learned a lot, and I hope that you did too. And I'm going to have links down below for everything that we talked about, including Andreas' social media links. And I definitely encourage you to follow him on his social media accounts, and also check out Andreas' YouTube channel. If you're wanting to learn more about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, Andreas is definitely the man to teach you. So make sure you're checking that out. Links will be down below. If this is your first time ever checking out any of my content, like I said earlier, please explore my channel while everybody's sitting at home in self-quarantine mode, social distancing. Get caught up if you're already watching my stuff. I've got lots of different videos, from interviews to tutorials to reviews to just anything, even my practice change videos. I definitely encourage people to watch my practice change videos. That is my philosophy of being the change that you want to see in this world. So I hope that you found value in today's video. I hope you find value in all of my content. That's kind of the point in all this. I do encourage you as well to follow me on LBRY. As I said earlier, LBRY is my backup channel. We are obviously living in uncertain times right now. There's a lot of censorship and shadow banning going on. At any point, my channel could disappear from YouTube. So make sure you're following me on LBRY. That is my backup channel. And I do post exclusive content there that I don't post anywhere else, as a way to encourage people who like my videos and content to check out that platform, because I'm trying to support decentralization as much as possible, and I encourage others to do so as well. And as always, I encourage you to be the change by practicing change. I hope that you stay as healthy and as safe as you possibly can. Be the change you want to see, because we need that more than ever in this world. I promise you, we will get through this, but the best way that we're going to get through this is together. So I love you.